it's a fun experiment to think about, like 15 minutes of research and theory. And so I want to hold to that aspect, because I know if you've been working, actually, I think all of us in education have been working relentlessly. We've been sitting in Zoom meetings that last at least an hour, so it gets a little fatiguing. So these sessions are just meant to provide you a nice bite-sized amount of research and theory that could provoke thought and then help guide in whatever decision making that you're involved in right now, especially if you're in education. I almost wanted to call this session like things that keep me up at night, because Bronfrenbrenner, who is the researcher theorist that we'll be looking at today, is someone that keeps me up at night. I'm concerned about our kids. And one of the things that actually I saw today from the BBC, and I know I will have to share my screen very soon, there was a BBC headline that said, and I wanted to read it to you. Well, actually, I'll just share my screen. Anyway, it talked about how the impact of COVID-19, especially given all of the disruptions for students, is going to be very long lasting, and that we won't know the real impact for a very long time. And so that's exactly what today is about. It's about really taking a look at the potential impact that COVID-19 is having on our children, on our students as they're growing up. And I know when I created this session and I created this document, and you'll see when we start, I didn't overlap the modern day civil rights movement that we're in either. So I know that's also going to play a part, and I will play around with it because it is an extra layer of an already sort of like very fragile experience that we're all in. So ecosystems in the age of COVID-19. So we're going to use Yuri Bronfrenbrenner and human development theory. Now I want to add that when I was a principal, I always took into consideration certain theorists, because it wasn't about their literacy or their numeracy that kept me up at night. It was like, holy cow, we're responsible for growing little human beings, and I want to make sure they're healthy and happy and are civically engaged. And so that was ultimately what I wanted to create. And so, like I said earlier, there were some theorists that I leaned on a lot, and so he's one of them. So just so you know, Yuri Bronfrenbrenner was an American psychologist. He was professor emeritus at Cornell, but my favorite thing about him, because this is how much he loved children, is he was the founder of the National Head Start program. So he created this theory to kind of think about all of the environments that children interact in or live in, and the impact that it has on their growth. And so he has a very specific model. You'll be getting this PowerPoint because I know it has more information than what I'm about to say, but I'm also, like I said, we're playing with this 15-minute mark. So he created a model about how all of the systems, or the environmental systems, impact one another, and the impact that it then has on children as they're growing up. So I'm going to slow us down and talk about that. So here is what the systems look like. There's the child, right? And then there's the microsystem, which is the immediate environment. The immediate environment to a child is definitely their home, definitely their school, their peers, that kind of thing. The actual immediate environment where the child interacts. The mesosystem is the connections in those environments. And like I said, I'll go through a little bit further. The exosystem is an indirect environment. Then there's the macro and there's a chrono. So let's get into, this is what it looks like as a whole. What you saw right now was just a slice. So you got familiar with the names. But again, the reason why I love this theorist so much is because it's boom, child at the center, and everything else is what impacts the child. Okay, so let's take a look at the microsystem. So as I said earlier, the microsystem is the most immediate environment for children. It is your daily home, your daycare, your peer group. It's the interactions that involve those personal relationships with family members, teachers, and caregivers. How children interact and the experiences they have of how they're treated or how they treat others. This actually goes and impacts the way that they continue to develop relationships further in their life. So that's why it's so important for teachers to have healthy relationships with their students, to show care, to show empathy, to model all of those behaviors, because this is where they learn them. So that's the micro. The next system, which isn't pictured, as you can see, it didn't change, is the mesosystem. And I think the system is fascinating. The mesosystem talks about the micro and how they interact. So for example, how a child's school and home communicate and how they relate is really important. I'll give you a very pertinent example. I'm a little unhappy about how my son's school is showing up with this distance learning. I will never, ever, ever say that out loud or within earshot of him. that will then encourage the critical thought that I have about one of his teachers could potentially impact his relationship in a very negative way. When I was principal, I know I would say sometimes we're getting families that had bad relationships as children with certain people. I could tell because they come in with the principal already wanting to fight, and then they experience me and say, oh wait, no, you're not like the principal that I was in trouble with when I was 12. No, so people carry these sorts of messages of how we relate to each other. So it's really important that how we communicate makes sense. So especially now when we're all trying distance learning, how is the school communicating with family? How is it healthy? How is it proactive? How is it positive? That has an impact into the child's human development. The exosystem, so we talked about the micro, we talked about the meso. Now the exosystem is that indirect environment. So for example, we go to work, our children don't. But if I come home with some drama from work or some complaint or a promotion, my child vicariously feels that. So the example that's on this slide talks about a father who's continually passed up for a promotion and might come back and then take out the anger with the household. So these are the systems that children don't necessarily enter, but the parents do, or the aunties do, or someone brings it in. And so it's a vicarious sort of experience of it's an indirect environment. I don't necessarily have to go to my husband's job to know he's always in conflict as an attorney, because when he comes home and he's had a bad exchange, I can feel that bad exchange. I'm sure we've all lived some sort of part around that. The next system is that macrosystem. It's the largest one, but it's the most distant. It's the value system that comes from our culture, from our values, from the dominant beliefs, from our political parties, from the economic systems. The example that's on this page talks about children in war-torn areas will experience a different kind of development than children in peaceful environments. So again, it's what we value. And so if right now we're paying attention to this, we're seeing the politicization of science, of wearing the mask or not wearing the mask, of defunding police or not defunding police. And so it's very heightened right now, especially in these current times. And that's really what the social and cultural values part is. The last one is the chronosystem. The chronosystem is the dimension of time. And so that one kind of changes. My favorite example of this is, for example, we often joke when people were raised during the Great Depression, you know, that they reuse baggies or they reuse tinfoil because they grew up taking care of things and not having abundance. And so I'm actually thinking, because I'm going through COVID, that I'll be the grandparent that's like wiping everything down before it comes into the house. And so all of these things, the chronosystem, the changes over time do impact our development as well. So that's an explanation really of how all of these systems interact and then participate in the development of a child. So again, this is why I love it. Again, it's the child's at the center, and all of this, the relationships between the environments then help create a healthy child. So the part that was keeping me awake at night, because this is a theorist that I use quite often, is I kept thinking everything on Bronfrenbrenner's ecosystem is being impacted by COVID. So I literally took it and wrote over it, and just to validate my worry, I guess, and decided to go, yep, every single bit that takes place in creating a healthy human being right now is being altered or disrupted, and I'm concerned about that. So sometimes the family, maybe they lost their job, maybe they're essential workers. The health services, maybe we're ignoring certain health services because we don't want to expose ourselves to COVID, or maybe the actual doctor saying, no, we're not taking any patients. I know that my dentist had called me because I had an appointment, and he said, we're not seeing people for cleaning yet. And so little things like that are happening. The schools are closed. My child is he's playing Minecraft online, but he's not seeing his peers. The neighborhood playground is closed. The exosystem, people are 6 feet away. And so that's really concerned me, is taking a look at how every single part of what creates a healthy human being right now is being altered. And like I said, we can take the civic unrest, the civil rights movement that's happening, and even overlapping that on this, especially because I live in La Mesa. La Mesa had some very specific outcomes after the first protest, and that causes, again, some macrosystem, some exosystem, and some chronosystem fears, where my son fell asleep to the sounds of helicopters and sirens all night. So what about this, right? So I'm worried, all of this is coming in. The thing to do is, how do we intentionally intervene, and what are some considerations? And so I just started brainstorming, like, what can I do as a parent? What can I do as an educator to think about how might I intervene in some of these things? So the first part, and I think the most important part, is ensuring healthy and continuous communication between home and school. Now that's a part, like I said, I'm critical inwards about how the school's playing out, but I'm making sure he's responsible. I'm making sure he's keeping up with his assignments and that he's talking to his teacher and has those positive outcomes, because it is so important. I'm participating in the forums, in the surveys, and I was critical about the survey too, but I kept that to myself. You're the only ones that know, but because it is really important for him to see that there's a healthy sort of communication between the two. I'm also working on designing spaces for play and for peer interaction. So it's not always Minecraft, but what else might we do together so that there's still play and there's still peers, so that his cousins are still talking to each other. We have nightly calls with our family so that there's still that connection. My cousin, who's very religious and practices, talked about dressing up every Sunday and still reading passages. Like, that was an honor that they did. Every Sunday they would dress up, go to church, go to brunch. And she said, so now we still wake up, we still dress up, we read some passages, and we have a nice breakfast together. So adding some sort of normalcy, but also continuing to honor those practices that you have. Some other considerations are to offer a narrative of care and compassion rather than fear. The news is really scary right now. They like to cause hysteria and divide. So I know that I seek out positive stories. There's a YouTube channel that only focuses on the good. And so we watch that. That's our news. There's good news too. So we're going to take care of that. Be mindful of the conversations we're having in front of children. They're listening, they're paying attention, they worry without telling us, and their worry emerges in different kinds of behavior. And then lastly, of course, create opportunities for that healthy and curious dialogue. What are you thinking about? How are you feeling about all of this? What would you like to know? And I'm going to say that that last question we don't often ask enough. Children are very curious beings, and to honor what it is they would like to know more of. Sometimes it gets a little difficult. And I know I've definitely received some responses to that where I have to negotiate between my own perspective of what's appropriate and then thinking about a 13-year-old developing mind. So this was really the bulk of the 15 minutes. It was really to think about this large exosystem and how they relate to each other and how they impact, but also paying attention to our responsibility of where we are as an adult within these systems and how we can healthily intervene for the sake of our students. So I believe that did I finish in less than 15 minutes? Yay. So I'm going to stop share here. Are there any questions? Do you have any questions so far? And we also have a little bit of a survey because, like I said, we're experimenting with this 15-minute time mark. We're experimenting with like giving you bite-sized pieces of research and theory to help guide and think about thought. Now, I know that there was one question about, so what does this have to do with equity? It has everything to do with equity because it is everything that we're creating. It's a system that we're creating for children, and we have to be mindful of how they interrelate and how they interact. So really, we have to pay attention to that and also lean in on the research and theory that already exist. Whew, all right, 15 minutes of quick talking. Thank you so much for spending your afternoon. I know it's a hot day.